morning to carry out a new search. Joining us live from the Bahamas is CBS News correspondent Christian Benavides. Christian, good morning. It's a stunning development. What more can you tell us about this new search?
Errol, good morning. Well, divers arrived here yesterday. They're going to target previously unsearched areas of the Sea of Abaco right behind me, looking for new evidence.
The search for missing Michigan mother Lynette Hooker is intensifying as this U.S. Coast Guard cutter carrying a team of specialized divers and investigators arrived in Marsh Harbor Tuesday night.
Now, some of the challenges in this search will be the unpredictable tropical weather down here and how much time has passed since Lynette first went missing.
The ocean has a way of swallowing secrets, keeping them buried beneath layers of shifting tides and crushing blackness. But sometimes, the water refuses to cooperate. On April 4th, the crystal-clear, postcard-perfect waters of the Abaco Islands in the Bahamas became the backdrop for a nightmare. A frantic distress call pierced the maritime frequencies, shattering the serene tropical air. Brian Hooker, a man whose life had been built on the waves, was reporting the unthinkable. His 55-year-old wife, Lynette Hooker, was gone. According to Brian, it was a tragic, instantaneous accident. A sudden slip, a lost footing, a plunge into the dark depths of the sea. He claimed he tried to save her. He claimed he fought against the elements, reaching out into the emptiness. But the ocean was simply too fast, too vast, and too cruel. Within moments, the woman he loved had vanished beneath the surface, leaving behind nothing but an empty horizon and a husband frozen in grief. But as the initial shockwave of the disappearance settled over the islands, a cold, unsettling stillness took its place. When the local authorities looked out across the water that day, they didn't just see a tragedy. They saw an open-ended question. The sea in the Abacos is famously transparent, a place where the white sandy bottom is visible even at great depths. Yet there was no sign of Lynette. No floating debris, no struggle left behind on the surface, just the pristine, unbothered blue. It wasn't long before the narrative began to fray at the edges. What should have been a straightforward, albeit heartbreaking, search and rescue mission quickly transformed into something far more calculated, cold, and suspicious. The local Bahamian authorities began to realize that the story being handed to them didn't match the geometry of the sea, and the whispers began. Did Lynette Hooker truly fall, or was she pushed into a darkness she could never escape? To understand the chill that settled over this case, you have to look at who Lynette Hooker was. To her family and friends back in the United States, she was a beacon of warmth, a woman whose life was defined by her deep connections to her loved ones and her vibrant spirit. She wasn't a reckless adventurer. She was careful, grounded, and deeply loved. The voyage to the Bahamas on their vessel, the Soulmate, was supposed to be a chapter of relaxation, a beautiful escape from the grind of daily life. But those close to Lynette knew that beneath the pristine photographs and the dream of a tropical paradise, there were currents of tension. Relationships on land are complicated enough, but when trapped on a boat, isolated by miles of open ocean, those complications can magnify. The space shrinks, the walls close in, and any hidden friction becomes a powder keg. Her family knew her habits, her fears, and her physical capabilities. When the news reached them that she had simply tumbled over the side of the boat and vanished, every instinct they possessed screamed that something was terribly wrong. They knew Lynette, and more importantly, they knew she wouldn't have just slipped away into the night without a fight. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation hit a wall of international red tape and bureaucratic silence. The Royal Bahamas Police Force processed what they could, but a dark, frustrating gap grew between the tragedy and the truth. Brian Hooker maintained his innocence, standing by his story that the ocean had stolen his wife in a cruel twist of fate. He was, by all legal standards, an innocent man until proven guilty. But innocence rarely requires the kind of forensic scrutiny that was quietly brewing behind the scenes. The Coast Guard and the Coast Guard Investigative Service, or CGIS, were watching. They weren't just looking at the water, they were looking at the data. Then came the turning point that changed everything. The digital footprint of the Soulmate began to speak. Every modern marine vessel leaves behind a trail of invisible breadcrumbs. The GPS systems, the onboard electronics, even when seemingly powered down or idling, are constantly whispering to the satellites above, logging coordinates, mapping routes, and recording the precise passage of time. When federal investigators finally extracted the electronic data from the soulmate, they didn't find confirmation of Brian's story. Instead, they found a phantom route. The digital breadcrumbs drew a completely different line across the Bahamian charts, a path that Brian had never mentioned, leading to areas of interest that had never been searched. The boat had stopped where it shouldn't have. It had lingered in the silence of the sea during hours that didn't align with the official timeline of the accident. Armed with this new, damning digital map, the United States Coast Guard didn't just resume the search. They launched a massive, high-stakes tactical operation. They brought in heavy resources, remote-operated vehicles, specialized divers, and high-tech aerial drones. But most shockingly, they reached out to domestic law enforcement, bringing in a highly specialized cadaver K-9 team from the Broward County Sheriff's Office. A dog trained to detect the invisible, microscopic gases of human decomposition, not just on land, but rising through the columns of salt water. The deployment of such an asset 2 months after the disappearance sent a clear, thunderous message to everyone watching. The authorities were no longer looking for a survivor. They were hunting for a body, and they were looking for a crime scene. The tension in the Abacos reached a fever pitch as the large support vessel anchored in the new target zones. This wasn't a standard recovery effort. It was an aggressive search for forensic truth. But the ocean is a hostile environment for evidence. The blistering tropical sun and the corrosive, relentless salt water work around the clock to destroy DNA, wash away trace blood, and degrade physical clues. Investigators knew they were racing against time and the elements. Every dive, every sweep of the underwater cameras, and every pass of the K-9 along the coastline was a desperate attempt to piecing together the final moments of Lynette Hooker. The Coast Guard eventually concluded their active physical mission in the islands, returning to the United States without publicizing the discovery of her remains. But the silence from the authorities wasn't a sign of defeat. It was the quiet before the storm. They had seized the soulmate. They had officially extradited the couple's dinghy back to American soil for rigorous forensic examination. They were putting their ducks in a row, building a case brick by brick, and leaning heavily toward a logical, devastating conclusion. What did the digital data reveal about those final, silent hours on the water? What secrets are hidden in the fibers of that seized dinghy? And ultimately, what does the Coast Guard already know that they aren't telling the public? If you want to follow every twist and turn of this chilling investigation as we uncover the truth, make sure to support the channel. Hit that like button, share this video with fellow true crime enthusiasts, and subscribe to True Crime Exposure. Don't forget to turn on your notifications so you never miss an update on this case. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe the digital GPS evidence will be enough to finally bring down charges? Or will the ocean keep the truth about what happened to Lynette Hooker forever? Long before the soulmate ever dipped its hull into the turquoise waters of the Bahamas, the life Brian and Lynette Hooker built on land was already weathering severe storms. To the casual observer scrolling through their social media, they were the picture of early retirement bliss. Videos captured a smiling, vibrant Lynette bouncing across the deck of their boat while it was docked in Kemah, Texas, eagerly telling the camera that they were finally leaving after 4 months of preparation. They were embarking on a grand, multi-year sailing adventure, a dream they had meticulously tracked on Facebook for over a decade. Lynette was no stranger to the water. Her mother would later recall that she grew up near lakes, spending her entire life swimming, sailing, and navigating boats. She knew the rules of the sea, and she respected its dangers. But behind the curated digital footage of sun-drenched decks and shared laughter lay a darker, much more volatile reality. Back home in Lenawee County, Michigan, about 70 miles southwest of Detroit, The Hookers' marriage was known to be a fragile ecosystem prone to sudden, violent shifts. Friends and family knew that beneath the surface, the couple shared a deeply contentious relationship, one that grew increasingly dangerous when alcohol was involved. Local police records painted a chilling picture of this hidden friction. Years prior, in 2015, police had responded to a domestic dispute where officers found Brian intoxicated and bleeding from the nose, claiming Lynette had struck him repeatedly in the face. Lynette, who was also intoxicated, was arrested and spent the night in jail, though formal charges were ultimately dropped because authorities couldn't determine who had instigated the violence. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a long-standing pattern of behavior. Those close to them described their bond as a perpetual cycle of highs and lows, a dangerous emotional current that they chose to pack up and carry with them into the isolation of the open ocean. When you isolate a volatile relationship on a sailing vessel, the water acts as both a beautiful escape and an inescapable cage. On the evening of April 4th, that cage finally snapped. The couple had anchored the Soulmate near the tiny islands on the eastern end of the Bahamas and were using their small, 8-foot motorized dinghy to travel from Hope Town to Elbow Key. According to Brian, it was just before sunset when the weather turned treacherous, bringing strong winds and choppy, unpredictable waters. Neither of them was wearing a life jacket, a detail Brian would later characterize as part of a catastrophic cascade of failures. He claimed that as the dinghy tossed violently in the waves, Lynette suddenly lost her footing and tumbled over the side into the dark Atlantic waters. But it was the immediate aftermath of the supposed accident that sent a wave of profound skepticism through the ranks of investigators. Brian told the Royal Bahamas Police Force a bizarre, baffling sequence of events. When Lynette fell overboard, she allegedly had the dinghy's ignition key in her possession. When she disappeared beneath the waves, the key went with her, instantly killing the engine and leaving Brian stranded in the dark, tossing sea. Instead of being able to circle back, utilize the boat's motor to search for his drowning wife, or immediately radio for emergency help, Brian claimed he was forced to pick up a pair of paddles. He spent hours fighting the heavy currents, manually rowing the small dinghy all the way from Elbow Key to a marina in Marsh Harbor to alert the authorities. By the time he finally raised the alarm, hours had passed, and the ocean had completely erased any trace of where Lynette had gone. To her family, the story felt deeply engineered. A woman who spent her life on boats, who knew how to swim, vanishing instantly without a sound, leaving her husband with a dead engine and a perfectly timed delay. The narrative was set, but as the tide began to turn, American authorities were about to discover that the digital heart of the Soulmate kept a far more accurate log than its captain. When the Royal Bahamas Police Force initially stepped onto the teak decks of the Soulmate, the atmosphere was thick with the heavy, stagnant air of an unresolved tragedy. Brian Hooker sat amid the luxury of his vessel, repeating the sequence of the catastrophic engine failure, the missing key, and the desperate, hours-long rowing marathon through the dark. For the local island authorities, operating with limited maritime forensic resources, the story was frustratingly difficult to disprove. The ocean left no skid marks, no spent casings, no physical trauma to analyze. But as the days bled into weeks, the jurisdictional lines began to blur. Because the Hookers were American citizens and the Soulmate was registered in the United States, the federal government quietly stepped into the fray. The Coast Guard Investigative Service, an elite federal law enforcement agency specializing in maritime crimes, officially took control of the case. And with their arrival, the nature of the inquiry shifted from a tragic accident to a calculated criminal investigation. The first major move by federal agents sent shockwaves through the close-knit boating community of the Abacos. Investigators didn't just inspect the couple's vessels, they seized them. The Soulmate and the small, controversial 8-foot dinghy were officially impounded and extradited back to the United States. Transporting a watercraft across international borders for forensic analysis is an immense, bureaucratic undertaking, signaling that authorities believed the answers were physically etched into the fiberglass and aluminum. Once the dinghy arrived on American soil, forensic technicians swarmed the vessel, looking past the dried salt and sun-bleached surfaces. They knew that even after months of exposure to harsh tropical elements, microscopic traces of DNA, blood, or struggle could still cling to the crevices. But while the physical search of the boat was a game of patience, it was the electronic heart of the soulmate that would ultimately tear Brian's timeline to shreds. Modern marine navigation systems are designed to keep sailors safe, but to a federal investigator, they are the ultimate, unyielding witnesses. Long after a captain flips a switch or powers down a dashboard, a ship's global positioning system remains quietly awake. It continuously communicates with a network of satellites overhead, dropping an invisible, highly precise trail of digital breadcrumbs across the globe. When digital forensic experts extracted the raw data from the soulmate's GPS, they didn't find a straight, logical voyage matching Brian's description of that fateful April evening. Instead, the satellites revealed a completely different story. The data mapped out a hidden route, a erratic, lingering path that strayed far from the coordinates Brian had provided to the police. The internal clock of the navigation system showed the boat stopping and idling for significant periods in isolated areas of the water, hours before the emergency was ever reported. The digital timeline refused to lie, showing a terrifying discrepancy between where Brian claimed he was struggling to row for his life and where the boat actually sat in the dead silence of the night. Armed with this newly unearthed digital roadmap, the Coast Guard launched an unprecedented, targeted recovery mission in June, returning to the Bahamas not to look where Brian said his wife fell, but where the GPS said the boat had actually been. They brought a massive support vessel packed with cutting-edge technology, including a VideoRay Defender remote-operated vehicle. This advanced underwater drone, equipped with front-facing sonar and high-definition cameras, was lowered into the pristine waters to execute systematic, overlapping search patterns along the sea floor. Beside the mechanical eyes of the ROV, highly trained Coast Guard divers plunged into the depths, combing the white sands for anything out of place, a piece of clothing, a personal item, or human remains. Yet, searching an open ocean months after a disappearance is a monumental challenge, and as the underwater teams battled shifting currents and the vast emptiness of the sea, investigators realized they needed an asset that could sense what cameras and human eyes completely missed. They needed to bring the hunt to the surface. The true weight of the digital evidence became undeniable when the Coast Guard brought in an asset that changed the entire nature of the operation. Stepping onto the deck of the search vessel was a highly specialized cadaver K9 named Maggie, brought in alongside her handler from the Broward County Sheriff's Office. Maggie was a resource the Coast Guard did not possess internally, a dog trained specifically to detect the microscopic chemical signatures of human decomposition. While the public saw footage of Maggie tracking across the sun-baked, remote shorelines of the Abacos, her true utility in maritime investigations was far more profound. As a body decomposes underwater, it releases specialized gases that fight through the water column, breaking the surface tension and dissipating into the air. A master-level K9 can catch these fleeting scents even from the bow of a moving boat, pointing handlers towards secrets buried deep beneath the waves. The deployment of a domestic homicide asset to a foreign territory 2 months after the fact told a silent, heavy story. Investigators were no longer treating this as a standard search and rescue. They were treating the pristine Bahamian waters as an underwater crime scene. The tactical team utilized a method known as a towed diver search, where 2 highly trained Coast Guard divers held onto the sides of a moving vessel, their eyes fixed on the sea floor as the boat systematically dragged them across the new GPS target zones. They were looking for anything: a pair of sunglasses, a piece of clothing, or the heavy reality of human remains, but the ocean is a cruel custodian. In the hot tropical climate, with water temperatures rising day by day, the window for preserving physical evidence shrinks rapidly. The currents shift the sands, marine life alters the landscape, and the salt water relentlessly degrades whatever it touches. Despite the intense, high-resource deployment of drones, sonars, and K-9 assets, the physical search of the waters eventually concluded without the public recovery of Lynette's body. To the outside world, it looked like a devastating dead end. But within the walls of the Coast Guard Investigative Service, the focus was simply shifting. The mission in the Bahamas was over, but the stateside investigation was accelerating. Experts analyzing the case noted that the sheer scale and cost of the operation pointed to a singular, logical conclusion. Authorities were not looking for an accident anymore. If federal investigators believed Brian Hooker's story of a tragic slip and a broken engine key, they would not have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars executing a high-stakes tactical sweep of a completely different coordinates. They were quietly putting their ducks in a row, matching the digital breadcrumbs of the boat's timeline against the physical evidence being scraped from the seized dinghy, preparing to bring a definitive, devastating charge against the man who claimed the sea stole his wife. As we watch this dark puzzle piece itself together, we want to know where our community is tuning in from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. It reminds us how far Lynette's story is reaching. The physical assets seized by federal authorities provided the concrete foundation that the investigation's early days severely lacked. When the United States Coast Guard cutter Margaret Norvell, a 154-foot vessel packed with specialized tactical gear, arrived in Marsh Harbor, it marked a massive escalation in the case. The government was no longer treating this as a simple disappearance. They were officially investigating the matter under a heavy federal framework designated for the possible foreign murder of a U.S. national. Investigators quietly traveled to the Abaco Inn, meticulously retracing the couple's steps at the last location, where Lynette was verified to have been seen alive before she stepped onto that water. While the public remained focused on Brian's initial claims that his wife had simply bounced off the back of their 8-foot dinghy during a nighttime ride from Elbow Key back to the Soulmate, the recovered digital forensic data told a radically different story. U.S. officials confirmed that location data extracted from one of Brian's personal electronic devices completely undercut his original timeline. The coordinates didn't just show a different path. They suggested that search crews had been directed to an entirely wrong sector of the sea during those critical, early hours when rescue teams were desperately scanning Aunt Pat's Bay. This glaring contradiction was exactly what prompted federal authorities to execute a dramatic mid-sea interception. As the 46-foot Soulmate left the Bahamas and sailed approximately 40 miles off the coast of Florida, Coast Guard vessels moved in, intercepting and officially seizing the yacht. Soon after, video captured the moment a tender boat confiscated the couple's dinghy, hauling it onto a federal cutter for exhaustive examination. On board the small craft, investigators were seen surveying the structure, testing the motor mechanisms, and holding up a single life jacket. Bahamian police officially handed over their primary findings to the Coast Guard Investigative Service, including critical evidence that further highlighted how key elements of Brian's story failed to align with reality. Though Brian Hooker had been detained for 5 days of questioning by Bahamian police before being allowed to return to Michigan, his legal immunity was rapidly evaporating. He maintained his absolute innocence through his legal counsel, yet federal agents were building a meticulous, ironclad case, matching the real-time movements of his phone and boat against the silent, empty spaces of the Sea of Abaco. The absence of an immediate trial or a swift courtroom resolution in the aftermath of Lynette's disappearance did not mean the wheels of justice had ground to a halt. Instead, it marked the beginning of a high-stakes, international legal chess match. In the days immediately following the incident on April 4th, Bahamian authorities made a decisive move, arresting Brian Hooker and placing him into custody for grueling interrogation. For 5 days, inside local precinct walls stretching from Marsh Harbor to Freeport, detectives pressed Brian on the glaring inconsistencies of his timeline and the turbulent undercurrents of his relationship with his wife. His defense counsel, Terrell Butler, vehemently maintained that the island authorities possessed absolutely no concrete forensic evidence to sustain a criminal charge. Under Bahamian law, without a body or immediate proof of foul play, the window to legally detain a suspect is punishingly short. On April 13th, authorities were forced to open the cell doors, releasing Brian from custody and allowing him to fly back to the United States. To the outside world, his return to Michigan looked like total freedom, but behind closed doors, a massive federal machinery was quietly grinding into place. Because the alleged crime took place in international waters against an American national, the United States federal government invoked a powerful, rarely used legal framework: the investigation of a possible foreign murder of a U.S. citizen. Brian Hooker was no longer dealing with a localized island police force. He was now squarely in the crosshairs of the FBI and the Coast Guard Investigative Service. Federal prosecutors began assembling a massive dossier, utilizing the seized electronics, the raw satellite GPS tracking, and the forensic sweeps of both the Soulmate and the 8-foot dinghy. In the eyes of maritime legal experts, the decision to systematically confiscate these multi-ton watercraft and ship them across international borders suggested that federal agents were presenting a meticulous case to a grand jury. While Brian remained free and uncharged, his legal team continued to release statements categorically and unequivocally denying any wrongdoing, framing the entire tragedy as an unpredictable act of nature in treacherous seas. They claimed Brian was a grieving husband who fully intended to cooperate and even return to the Bahamas to continue searching for his beloved wife. Yet, the legal reality looming over him grew heavier by the day. Federal investigators were taking their time, treating every byte of data recovered from the yacht's infrared camera systems and navigation applications as crucial blocks to build an ironclad indictment. They knew that in high-profile maritime cases where a body remains unrecovered, prosecutors get only one shot at a conviction. The silence from the Department of Justice wasn't an admission of defeat. It was the slow, deliberate tightening of a legal lasso, waiting for the perfect moment to drop the weight of a federal indictment on the man who claimed the ocean was the perfect accomplice. The human cost of a disappearance on the high seas is an agonizing, open-ended grief that leaves a family suspended in time. Back in Michigan, the ripple effects of that silent night in the Bahamas tore through Lynette's loved ones, leaving behind a wake of devastation and profound disbelief. For her mother, Darlene Hamlet, the nightmare was compounded by the baffling narrative surrounding her daughter's sudden disappearance. Darlene openly shared that her family had practically grown up on the water. Lynette's entire life had been defined by her proximity to lakes. She was a seasoned swimmer, an experienced sailor, and highly capable on boats. When the news arrived that Lynette had simply slipped away from an 8-foot dinghy without a struggle, every maternal instinct screamed that the story was a fabrication. Darlene expressed a desperate hope for a miracle, but as the days grew longer and the silence deeper, that hope shifted into a fierce, unwavering demand for answers. This collective skepticism was echoed by Lynette's daughter, Carly Aylesworth, who publicly voiced her doubts about the official sequence of events.
What raises the alarm bells?
For one, he's already made this threat 2 years ago that this exact thing was going to happen to her, that he would make sure this would happen to her. And he's threatened it, I'm pretty sure, multiple times and has done actions to her that have hurt her. So the fact that this is happening now is kind of coincidental, I guess, or it's just funny because you said that you were going to do this and now it's happening. So why wouldn't I just believe your story? I would need more answers than just believing your story at this point.
To those who knew Lynette intimately, the idea that a lifelong boater would seamlessly fall overboard during a routine trip was mathematically and physically improbable. Her family watched from afar as the legal system tangled in international jurisdiction, their frustration mounting with every passing week that Brian remained free. The pain was further magnified by the digital ghost of the couple's online presence. For over a decade, the couple had broadcasted their travels under the social media moniker, the Sailing Hookers, presenting a meticulous chronicle of an enviable retirement. Now, those archived videos of Lynette smiling on deck served as a haunting reminder of a life cut short, turning what was meant to be a dream voyage into a highly scrutinized archive of their final months together. The grief gripping the community of Onstead, Michigan, was not just born of loss, but of a profound lack of closure. Without a body to bury, a funeral cannot truly bring peace. It remains a temporary marker in an ongoing investigation. Every headline detailing the Coast Guard's deployment of cadaver dogs and underwater drones reopened a raw, bleeding wound for Lynette's friends and family. They were forced to reconcile the vibrant, warm woman they loved with the cold, scientific reality of an underwater crime scene. As the physical search in the Sea of Abaco concluded, and the focus turned completely to the forensic labs on American soil, Lynette's family remained trapped in a silent vigil, left to wonder if the ocean would ever give up its secrets, or if the truth would have to be dragged, piece by piece, from the technology left behind on the empty decks of the Soulmate. The case of Lynette Hooker stands as a chilling testament to the fact that, while secrets can be buried, modern forensic science has found a way to make the invisible speak. As the U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Service continues to process the physical structure of the seized 8-foot dinghy in Fort Lauderdale, and digital experts methodically chart the exact satellite track of the Soulmate, the gap between Brian Hooker's original account and the raw data continues to widen. The ocean didn't leave behind eyewitnesses on that dark April night, but the digital breadcrumbs left behind by cellular devices and marine navigation apps have effectively given investigators a map to a truth that was never supposed to be found. Brian Hooker remains a free man, protected by the legal presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a court of law. His defense team maintains that the sea simply claimed a life in an unpredictable, tragic accident. Yet, the relentless posture of federal prosecutors, operating under the specialized framework of a foreign murder investigation, signals that the system is not prepared to let the case wash away with the tide. For Lynette's family, the legal limbo is an everyday torment, an agonizing reality where the woman who loved the water has become the subject of an international criminal mystery. The true resolution of this tragedy doesn't just rely on finding answers. It relies on whether the meticulous digital evidence built by authorities can finally break the silence of the Sea of Abaco. What do you think really happened out on the water that night? Do you believe the Coast Guard's digital evidence will ultimately lead to definitive criminal charges, or will this case remain a mystery kept by the sea? If you want to stay updated on every breaking development in this investigation and support deep dive documentary journalism, please take a moment to engage with the channel. Hit the like button, share this video with others in the true crime community, subscribe to True Crime Exposure, and turn on all post notifications so you never miss a new release.